Hi. As you know, I got up at 6:10, which was a bit of a problem for me. Anyway, yeah, I'm Andrew Jeavons. I've been around this business for a long time, unfortunately, as you'll learn during this talk. As was stated, I worked on Quantum. I also worked on Quanvert and all these ancient packages. I was actually a renegade psychologist. I fell out of academic psychology and wound up in Quantime with the estimable Ed Ross, who I might mention later. Anyway, I'm going to talk about, I'm calling it the quantization of cognition and using surveys with AIs. This little slide, and I'll give you start off the bingo with neural networks. The original paper about neural networks was in 1943, so these things are really old. And punch cards, because that's when computers really became generally used, and market research was full of punch cards, and the old people in here will be sort of looking at the floor, remembering those lovely days of all that paper. And that's like, and the bottom one is this guy called Cajal, who was a Spanish neurologist who do these lovely drawings of the brain, and he's always been a favourite of mine for various reasons. Okay, so one of the things about people is that we communicate in language, and that's great, and we do that most of the time. We don't use images. We don't carry around a bunch of flashcards saying, and when somebody says, "How are you?" and you hold up a card or a phone with an image on it. You might feel like it sometimes and, might communicate it on social media, but we use language. That's the core of our knowledge base, is language. And this is the guy who I feel is kind of the poster child for quantization of cognition. This guy, Rensis Likert. And back in 1932, he developed the 5-point scale. Who hasn't heard of a Likert scale? Don't put your hand up if you haven't. People you'll get banned from the organisation or something. Anyway, he invented this scale of 1 to 5, where 1 is, whatever it is, and 5 is whatever it is, because he needed a way. He was a social psychologist, which in my field was sort of, not a real thing, but my apologies. But anyway, and he needed a way of assessing what people felt about things. He was an expert in management psychology a lot. Now, there's nothing natural about, say, a 5-point scale when it comes to talking about your feelings. Multiple choice questions aren't particularly natural. You might say to your spouse or something, "Do you want this or do you want that?" You don't say, "Well, I'm going to give you 5 choices. You can answer 2 of them, and there's another. If it's other, then you have to tell me what it is." You don't do that. We give a couple of choices. That's it. NPS scales. Net Promoter Score scales aren't natural. Scale of sentiment. We don't go around saying, "I love you 3" on a 1 to 5 scale where 3 is. You wind up divorced. We just don't do that. We don't function that way. But in order to cope with all the language that people produce when you ask them questions, people started to distill them into numeric values. And I always feel that Likert was kind of, as I say, the poster child for this, the 5-point scale. Whatever it is, you can put it on a 5-point scale. Now, turning now to what we do, no sales pitch. We do this thing where we do these AI personas, and, when in doubt, we simulate all sorts of things. Mainly we deal with segmentation studies, or where you've got an identifiable population, and we produce a persona which personifies that population, and you ask it questions and talk to it, and and if you tell them they don't exist, they get very upset. We've got a transcript of these things having an existential crisis and crying and refusing to talk and swearing at us. It's quite freaky, but they can get very realistic responses. So these are very useful because, as we know, personas, producing personas, particularly from segmentation studies, is, pretty much a business. And, a couple of years ago, we were producing these personas via AI, and we thought, okay, what happens if we asked them what colour is their kitchen? And they gave us answers which seemed to comply to their personas. or you ask them, what are you going to have for dinner tonight? And they'll give you an answer. So they're quite useful. But there's an inevitability with these things. Sooner or later, a client is going to say, well, can we do a survey with these things? You know, I was immersed in surveys until, you know, this kind of stuff came along. That was always my business in one way or another. And because we've always had surveys, you know, it was something I knew was on the horizon. So, you know, I duly developed an interviewing system. I'd worked on another Q product called Concept. They all started with Q. I don't know why I had an obsession with Q for some reason. I never worked that one out. And that was a telephone interviewing system. I did a lot of work on that and dialers. So I could write a survey system, and I called it Tullius because I'm a pretentious old fart, and I thought that was a cool name. And we had experimented with these personas and surveys. You know, we'd said to them, you know, what do you think about this? Give us on a scale of 1 to 5. There you go, look at scale. And they'll answer, you know, they'll give you an answer, but it was very unstructured. And the first thing that came along from the clients was concept tests. Now, that's pretty common, you know, concept surveys, you know, surveys about, you know, will this concept work? So we thought, okay, they don't tend to be very complicated, so I can make a survey system that does this. The next question was, what kind of style do we want this to be? Do you do it like Catty, where it's one question at a time, which is pretty slow, rather inefficient? Do you do it more like the web, which is less conversational? You might present some questions in a block. You might present grids if you're feeling really, you know, advanced. Or do we go back to the old style of paper surveys? You know, the young people here won't remember paper surveys, but they were a big thing. And people were very reluctant to get rid of them, because very often they might have had surveys. I know one was in New York, had run for 25 years. And they didn't want to switch it to Catty, and there may even still be paper surveys around. And paper surveys can be quite complicated. They'll have quite complex instructions in them. So, you know, with a paper survey, you're given a block of questions and saying, hey, you know, will you answer them? And if you answered this way, go to here. And when you answered question 5 like this or like that, what did you mean? Turns out, paper's the most efficient and the most economical approach. You can present them with blocks of questions. I think at the moment we're, well, 10 to 15. And you can probably present more. I mean, the latest Gemini model that just came out is what? It's a million tokens input. You know, that's quite a lot. It's quite a lot. So you can give them a lot of information in one go, and they'll sort it out. You've always got a bit of a problem with this effect called needle in a haystack. That is, you know, you give an AI a huge amount of information. Is it going to catch that little piece of information that you've given it? And we're still testing the bounds of this, of what kind of logic you can put in the block of questions that you present to the AI. You know, and if you've been in the survey business, you've come across, you know, the logic that people will give, you know, like if it's Tuesday and your left foot itches and all this kind of stuff, a very complicated statement, a very complicated piece of logic. Will they follow that? We're still working all that out. So the kind of thing seems to be is you give them a block of questions, and maybe then you do a bit of logic in your survey engine, then you give them another block of questions and go on like that. And we present those to different personas. One called Cameron, who I've interviewed endlessly, you know, and they will follow instructions. About 1 time out of 10, they send back the data in slightly the wrong format. Okay, you have to deal with that, you know, a bit like people, but you know, overall it seems to work. The compliance of them is an issue. So in this industry, as we know, and this is the Association for Survey Computing, we've got huge, epic, endless surveys around. We've been giving people surveys for, I don't know, 60 years probably, longer. And you know, we've got trackers with endless data based on surveys, different modalities, but it's always been surveys. It's always been structured questions. We've got to decide what their role is, if they have a role in AI, because like it or not, these things are slightly terrifying. You know, and I've been in the computer business a while, as they say, This is the most startling thing I've ever come across. The web was pretty amazing, but these, make it pale into insignificance. And my mind has changed about the capabilities of these things since I've started using them a few years ago. I had a different point of view, and we'll get onto that. And one of the things we need to decide is, do we simulate sample or model populations? Okay, this shows how old I am. I remember this TV program from 1983. This was a Leslie Ash. She played this secretary, receptionist, and they discovered in this ad agency, this was the core of the show, that she was the average person, and they didn't need to go out and test lots of people. They could actually just ask this young lady questions, and she would give the average answer. It only ran for one series, so, and I don't know why I remember it, and it was a very long time ago, but I do. I think somehow it's stuck in my mind. I was still a quasi-psychologist then. Quantime hadn't quite burned all that out of me. So we got kind of two ways of using these AIs. We can simulate sample. We can have, lots of simulations of individuals in a population. We sample people. We originally did this of asking lots of people questions because people vary. Unreliable buggers people, you ask them questions and they vary. So you say, okay, well, I'll take a sample and I'll take the average of these, or I'll do some sort of consolidation of what they said, because we want to get to that value that we want for that population or that cell of a sample. And, randomization, magic fairy dust of statistics. Hey, randomize it, it'll be okay. Well, lots of theories about that, but, that's what tends to happen. Or we model a population. We use the capabilities of the LLM to model a sample cell. We're not particularly interested in simulating lots of individuals within that cell. We just want a model of that cell based on whatever data we have. We work a lot with segmentation studies, so it tends to be a model of each segment based on data that we've got from the client. And we build essentially a persona or a set of personas, not very many, it's not hundreds, it might be 16, might only be 7, which are simulations of segments of data that the client has. So we're not asking lots of questions of lots of different individual simulated people, we're just building one model. Let's come back to surveys a minute. When we asked respondents, these nice people that I think it was Gemini produced for me because I was playing with Gemini. I'll get out of the way. We asked them questions. We use language and we turn it into numbers, and there's an error in doing that. I call it a quantification error. You can call it something else. But there's an error inherent in translating what people say into numbers, like Likert scales or whatever they are. Then we take that survey data and we explain it in some way in a report or presentation. And there is the old sort of saying, you don't want to put a lot of numbers in a report because it won't be read. So then we convert it back to language. So we've gone from language, distorted it by numbers, then taken the numbers and then distorted them by putting them back in language. And we had to do that because computers couldn't cope with language, and we didn't really have a choice. There wasn't much else we could do with it. Now this comes down to this guy, maybe, Henry Ford has said if he'd asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. Apparently he didn't say that, but it's a really good quote, and you need to hang it on somebody. Or let's say there isn't any proof he said it, but everybody says he said it, so what the hell? Look on it like social media. Enough people say it's true, it's true. But it's an interesting concept, saying that, are we using these large language models, keys in the name, language, the way we need to? Are we forcing our old way of doing things, which is surveys, which were great because computers couldn't understand language? They can now. The quote at the top was actually from a man who was studying Eskimos' perception of snow. Had a great time, I gather. I've not seen people who I call Brown. Five minutes left, which is fine. Now, originally, when LLMs came out, I thought, well, you know, stochastic parrots. And that's a very lovely picture, I thought, of a stochastic parrot AI produced. And they're just reproducing, in statistical terms, the language we put into them, you know. And that was everybody's feeling at the time. Changed my mind quite a lot since then. There's a lot of research done, a lot of results showing that they're developing what you can only call higher order representations of knowledge. They're not sentient, they don't think, none of that stuff. I can't say this word very well, anthropomorphize them too much. And we're guilty of doing it because we have personas, but you know. Now, there's a lot of research coming out about how they, particularly when they learn different languages, you can see within the network of activation within the system that they have some higher order representation of words that is aligned with their meaning. So these things are not thinking, but representing knowledge in a way we can't. We're pretty much stuck with three-dimensional representation of anything, maybe four on a good day. These things appear to do it in, I don't know how many, 11, 10, 12, whatever it is, and can work out relationships that we just can't see, or at least, well, we can't see. I mean, you read some of the papers about this, it's quite amazing. But these models are language-based, and that's the thing, it's all about the language. Maybe we should be using surveys in a different way. Maybe we should be saying, okay, let's get people to talk to us once a week about anything, about what's going on. We don't necessarily have a particularly structured way of talking to them. We don't necessarily force them into Likert scales or multiple choice questions or NPS scales. We just talk to them. We just say, well, what did you do this week? Oh, I walked the dog, I did this, I bought this, blah, 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 all this sort of stuff. You collect all this language from them and you train, calibrate, whatever you do with the AI. I mean, these days, there's lots of different ways of using this kind of stuff. And then you go, and if you're doing a concept test, you say, hey, I've got a new, my favorite test one is dog food based on dried insect protein. You know, it's a possibility. It's ecologically sound. It's probably good for the dog. Dogs eat anything in my experience, I mean, no matter what it is. If you've got a dog, you'll like, yeah, people have got dogs. And, you know, they'll probably say, well, you know, the personas or the AI will just go and say, well, yeah, no, maybe, something like that. We can't do that at the moment because clients, and we all want to eat, are really into surveys. So I'm going to do concept surveys for my clients on my personas. But I'm not convinced in the long run that's the right way to use them. We need to think about this. We need to think really about how we use these models. That's Gemini's representation of faster horses and cars. I kind of think the horses are cool, actually. I grew up around horses a bit, and, you know, those are slightly frightening horses. So that's really what I'm trying to say. We're going to use surveys, and surveys are ubiquitous, and we're not going to escape them. But in the longer term, over the next 3 or 4 years, we really need to be thinking how we're using these LLMs. And there are going to be other models. Yann LeCun, who's one of the gods of AI, is going off and doing his own Eli-Jepper models, which are more modeled on sort of trying to, the AI is trying to understand the world. But these LLMs are never going to go away. And we need to work out what's the best way to use them. And it's quite possible that the way we've been running surveys with people isn't the best way. So what's it going to be? Faster horses or cars?
Thank you, Andrew. Do we have a spare microphone? Sorry, great, thanks. We do have an online audience as well, so anybody who has questions, please can we use the microphone. Any questions for Andrew at this stage? I've got a question about higher order representation.
Oh, yeah.
When did you first start to notice it? Because I mean, we had our first conference 2 years ago, and you presented about personas. Were you aware of it then, or is it something that you've seen evolve over time?
I suppose it was a creeping awareness. People have done things with machine learning where they were pretty good at predicting outcomes and stuff like that. Now, there was a paper published I happened to read about using an AI to predict breast cancer in a Norwegian population of women, and it turned out it was really, really good at this. And it was using a huge number of variables, and it really was getting it right. And that was one of the times I started thinking, yeah, that's just not some sort of reproduction of language. These things are really absorbing information of many different forms and being able to come out with a prediction.
Thanks, Andrew. Mainly for my bingo card, but I'm going to ask it anyway. You managed to go through that, and you didn't mention synthetic data. So,
no, I
but Andrew didn't say it. I said it. So what I was trying to work out, because you're modelling your populations rather than creating the survey data, clients, as you say, today still perhaps want data formats, data files to work with. So I've kind of, in my very basic understanding of synthetic data, I seem to be getting, either you've got 70% of your completes and you fill it out with 30% synthetic data, but your view of the personas is different. Is that a fundamental difference of the idea of synthetic data and personas, or am I misunderstanding it?
No, you're probably right. I mean, I do have a problem with calling it synthetic data. Data's data. If you have the simple equation for a straight line, y equals mx plus c, y is synthetic data. It's made up. The result of a model, a prediction, is data. And people here are saying that because AI's produced it, it's synthetic data. I can see Ray at the back looking away because we've had arguments about this. But yeah, I mean, I suppose, yeah, when we do the surveys, we're producing synthetic data, but I just call it the prediction of the model. It's like if it was some mathematical equation you put down. It is really, but it's so complicated we don't understand really what's going on inside these networks of neurons, neural networks. So I think it's synthetic data. I just don't use that term. Oh, Malloy. Yeah, no.
Andrew, I had an interesting experience this week, which was to participate in a face-to-face survey that the ONS are running called the Crime Survey for England and Wales. And so it's a proper old school random survey. They tried very hard to get me and eventually did. And it's a face-to-face interview, blah, blah, blah. Quite a lot of very detailed questions about my lived experience of crime in general and in my area and so on and so forth. Quite a lot of very personal, difficult questions about a whole range of subjects. I can't imagine, so none of that data is public. I don't know how an AI, either in any of your scenarios, would ever be able to represent that kind of data in that kind of detail that the ONS would trust. I mean, can you imagine an AI, a persona answering that questionnaire? Could you imagine that data being generated, just by asking a bunch of personas? Or does that still, that whole very detailed thing still live on?
A couple of years ago, I'd have said no. But you'd be surprised, you'd be startled about what these things actually can do. We'll do a little demo for you if you want. Okay. We'll go online and do it. And these models are developing, we're not at the end of it. I mean, yes, there are hardware issues with these massive server farms. So that, eventually there's going to be a scale problem. The GPUs are going to melt down or something. But, I mean, every time we give these personas sort of what we think is, stuff that is really not likely for them to give a coherent answer, they give coherent answers. And,
there's a difference between coherent and correct, though.
Well, yes, but first of all, let's start off with the answer. Then we can work out if it's correct. But,
Okay.
I've stopped thinking that these things can't do certain things. It was a bit of a shock. The word startling is used a lot in our company. It's like, oh, that's pretty startling, didn't know to do that. So maybe.
I remain sceptical.
Ray here.
So the ONS crime study is probably the best example of a high quality study. It gets a lot of criticism because it gets a lot of data wrong. And what Andrew is saying, I think, and where I'm looking at as well, is that why do we do the study? We get the study to try to understand about crime and how we should change it. That's the problem. The problem isn't how do we use AI to get that study data. The problem is how do we understand crime and what we can do about it. So that is, I think, the faster horse's point. I'll be the runner.
It's just a very quick observation. If you go down to the other side of the hall here, they've got the crime prevention on. So maybe we should just all go and just get some information from there.
You should see that bingo card.
I nearly went in there. Right, well, we done? Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Thanks very much.